Call the meeting to order. Those who care to, please stand for an opening prayer and pledge of allegiance. Mr. Cameron, if you would.
Let's pray. Dear Father, thank you for this day, and just thank you for all that you do for us. And Lord, we just thank you for this city, and Lord, we just pray for this city and pray that you would guide and direct us in all that we do and all that we say, and just guide our meeting tonight, and just give us wisdom in all we do. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this point, if there's anybody who would like to speak to anything not on the agenda, please step to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak to anything not on the agenda? Seeing none, citizen participation is closed. Need a motion and a second from the council for approval of the consent agenda.
Motion. Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries 8-0. On to board's commission committee schedule. Make sure everybody notes that the next city council meeting will be on December 11th. Normally the first and third Tuesday of the month. Considering we have Christmas and a lot of traveling, I'll make sure everybody's able to be here. So it will be on December 11th for the city council meeting. Moving on to old business and table items. Need a motion and a second for the second reading of bill number 18-41.
Motion. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Ms. Brenda.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, approving the final plat of the Monte Cristo Phase 5 subdivision.
Thank you. I need a motion and a second for final passage of bill number 18-41.
Motion. Second.
I have a motion and a second. We have Ms. Haynes here. We've had an overview of this. Do we have any questions regarding this bill before we move on to a roll call vote? Seeing no questions, roll call vote.
Councilmember Franklin.
Aye.
Councilmember Duran.
Aye.
Councilmember Russell.
Aye.
Councilmember Dykeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Brashears.
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson.
Aye.
Councilmember Self.
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0. Thank you, ma'am. At this point, I'll open a public hearing of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri regarding appropriating the revenue from the revenue of the City of Republic, Missouri expenditures in accordance with the fiscal year 2019 budget of the City of Republic, Missouri and providing for adjustments thereto. Ma'am, would you please give us an overview?
Okay. As he stated, this is the public hearing for our 2019 budget. We are required by Chapter 67 of Missouri Revised Statutes and City Charter to prepare an annual budget every year. This serves as the comprehensive plan for the budget for the upcoming year. Our total revenues that are projected for the 2019 budget year are $19,929,878. The total expenditures are $21,376,018. This includes $1,446,000 from cash reserves. You'll see later in the presentation that we are planning to make a debt retirement of $465,000 from the the wastewater fund, and that is included in the expenditures. So our budgeted financial results by fund are, hold on a second, Brenda, right. Never mind. The general fund is revenue of $7,599,000. Expenses of $7,286,000, which is approximately 36% of our budget. For most of you, you realize that our general fund is made up of the city clerk, the finance department, IT, municipal court, fire, police, animal control, and community development. We also have our enterprise funds, which are the water and the wastewater funds that our citizens pay for their services. Our revenue is projected at $5,525,000. Our expenses of $6,222,386, which is approximately 29% of our budget. Our special revenue fund is our parks and recreation funds, The revenue is $3,328,123. The operating expenses are $3,375,776. It's 15.79% of the budget projected. That brings us down to our special projects funds. Our street department, the revenue is $2,468,699. The expenses are $2,655,299, which is 12.42% of our projected overall budget. The fire sales tax, we project $334,825. Capital expenses are $459,610. They're going to use part of their unrestricted reserve, so it's 2.2% of their budget. Of the overall city budget. The capital improvement sales tax is generating $667,000 in revenue. Capital expenditures are $791,000. We are also projecting to use funds from this year that came in next year, so they're using their unrestricted reserve, and it's 3.7% of the overall budget. Last but not least is our stormwater fund. The revenue is only $6,000, and that's interest. We no longer collect our sales tax that goes into that fund. The capital expenditures are only $85,000 projected for next year, $399, and it's 0.39% of the overall budget. Just a quick recap of the most significant changes to the budget. We are adding in a few full-time positions. One is a utility billing accountant. This will address the audit finding to have more financial staff for internal control. A part-time human resource specialist for additional administrative support and HR support. A full-time senior planner. This was transitioning a contract planning position to full-time. A full-time city clerk court administrator with the departure of our current city clerk. And then a full-time meter technician. So we're going to have a third meter technician to help with the growth of the overall city. Last but not least, on the staffing side, we're projecting a loggers change, move to a non-contributory level, removing the 4% employee contribution. You'll hear more about that later in this agenda. And then last but not least, we have capital additions of a new phone system of $90,000. That was budgeted in 2018, but now brought forward to 2019. The police station roof needed replacement of $65,000. The fire station number 1 parking lot repaid for $40,000. And so the total overall capital outlay of the city is projected at $3,715,549, which is approximately 17.38% of the budget. The debt service, which is payments on debt, of course, is $2,570,822, and it's 12.0% of the overall budget. So, as a recap, staff is recommending, and administration, that we have a balanced budget, meaning that on the general fund side, we are not dipping into our unrestricted fund balance. Some of the other funds are projecting to use some for capital outlay and debt repayment, but we are recommending this budget to go on for approval by council, and if anyone has any comments or questions this time.
We're in the public hearing phase, so we'll
Yep.
call
Okay,
anyone to the podium who would like to speak against this item, reappropriating the revenue of the City of Republic, Missouri expenditures in accordance with the fiscal year 2019 budget. Please step to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak against it? Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in favor of this item, please step to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Seeing none, public hearing is closed. Okay, moving on to the bill that actually is associated with that public hearing. We do have an amendment. Prior to asking for the motion and second on this bill, I would ask Mr. Eisen to cover the amended items.
On Bill 1842, before the council today, there's 2 recommended amendments to it. The first recommended amendment is dealing with dates. Since we moved the council meeting from last week to today's date, There's one date change in there dealing with when the second reading would be, which is today's date instead of last week. The other thing was we had to do an amended notice of the public hearing because of the date change also, so that would be reflected also in the amendment before you guys as far as the date changes. The second amendment that's proposed for council tonight is a few minor changes as far as the actual budget itself, the booklet in front of you dealing with the 2019 budget. No numbers have been changed as far as any appropriation numbers or anything like that. Just a few clerical things were done, such as splitting a few accounts, adding some pages to it, dealing with some letters from the administration, removing highlights that were just there to let you guys know what the changes were between last year's and this year's budget. And then also the personnel schedule dealing with fire, police, community development. There were two minor changes to that regarding the number of full-time employees. But again, there were no changes dealing with the actual numbers or anything along those lines. Just some clerical housekeeping since the last meeting in order to clean it up for final passage today. If anybody has any questions, myself or Debbie would be happy to answer that. Otherwise, the two proposed amendments are before you guys today. If somebody would like to make a motion to amend based upon those proposed languages in front of you guys today.
Motion to amend.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion to amend carries, and now I will ask for a motion and a second for the second reading of bill number 18-42 as amended.
Motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries 8-0. Ms. Brennan.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri appropriating from the revenue of the City of Republic, Missouri expenditures in accordance with the fiscal year 2019 budget of the City of Republic, Missouri and providing for adjustments thereto.
Thank you. I need a motion and a second for final passage of bill number 18-42.
Motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions for Ms. Parks?
I may have misheard, which is probably the case, but on the general fund department expenditures, what was that total amount that you read from?
It should have been, I mistyped on my thing. You're right, the cover sheet is $7,786,618.
So this is correct.
Yes, the
Okay.
agenda is correct.
Bills. Any other questions, Ms. Parks? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Councilmember Self,
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson,
Aye.
Councilmember Jones,
Aye.
Councilmember Brashears,
Aye.
Councilmember Dykeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Russell,
Aye.
Councilmember Duran,
Aye.
Councilmember Franklin,
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0. Thank you, Ms. Parks. Before we move on to new business, I want to make sure if anyone came in late and they're wishing to speak about anything that's on the first reads or the resolutions, that you filled out a card. Otherwise, you will not be called to the podium to speak. So if you haven't filled out a card and you would like to, please raise your hand now so we can get that done. Nobody would like to speak that and fill out a card? Okay. Moving into this, we understand that we do enjoy having citizens come. We don't get to have this much of an audience very often, so I know you guys are thinking you came to a snooze fest, but with that, I want to make sure that I know emotions can run high in some of these things, and it's my job to maintain order. So I want to be very clear about the rules of order. When you're called, if you're wishing to speak, you will come to the podium and you'll have 5 minutes. In the council chambers, we are very strict on the 5 minutes. If you reach that 5 minutes, I will let you know that you have reached your 5 minutes and to wrap it up. If you choose to take another 5 minutes after that, I'll stop you. When you're at the podium, that's your time to talk, not from the audience. If you disagree with something somebody has to say, you probably should talk to them after the fact and not from the audience, because I will call order to the chambers if that were to happen. And we're all ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to act like ladies and gentlemen, so we don't insult each other. We're here to voice our concerns with something, and the council is very happy to hear it. So with that, we will move on to new business. I need a motion and a second for the first reading of bill number 18-43.
Motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Ms. Brennan?
An An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, amending the zoning code and official map by changing the classification of approximately 5 acres located at 139 East Miller Road from medium-density single-family residential, R1M, to Planned Development District, PDD, and the approval of the development plan for Miller Court Senior Villas, PD 18-03.
Thank you. Mr. Tyson.
This bill, if approved, would approve the development plan for the Miller Court Planned Development District. The subject property for this PDD is located at 139 East Miller Road and is comprised of approximately 5 acres of land, all 5 acres located within the city's medium-density single-family residential zoning district, usually abbreviated as R1M. The subject property is located with frontage and access to Miller Road, which is a secondary arterial in the city's major thoroughfare plan, and it is located approximately 275 feet east of the intersection of Miller Road with Main Street being a primary arterial. The subject property currently contains a principal single-family residential building and a detached accessory building. The property is surrounded by single-family residential zoning and land uses. The development plan in this particular case will allow for the development of a residential housing complex for seniors over 55 years of age, as restricted by a deed restriction included in the development plan. The development plan will allow for up to 40 residential units, resulting in a density of 8 dwelling units per acre. These residential buildings are restricted by the development plan itself to a height of 1 single story. The development plan provides for off-street parking for these dwelling units at a ratio of 1 parking space per unit. The development plan also allows for an off-site maintenance and office facility to provide for the management of the facility. The development plan provides for a substantial amount of screening and buffer yard on all 4 property lines. That screen including an earthen berm, as well as tree plantings of both deciduous and evergreen types and some shrubs. The infrastructure serving this subject property has been determined by city staff to be sufficient to serve the proposed development. While the development plan does result in a higher density of dwelling units than you would have in a lower density single-family zoning district, the restriction to its use to be a certain type of residential use, that being for a senior living facility, does have a mitigating effect on the impacts on infrastructure, making it more comparable, or in some cases less than, the impact that you would have from a single-family development. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on this application in November, and the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously recommended approval. Their findings of facts forms are provided to you in your packets. There has been a petition of surrounding property owners that has been submitted to the city. Those petitions are awaiting the city clerk's certification before they become effective. If that does become effective, the effect of that on this particular bill would be that it would require 6 affirmative votes in order for it to pass. Normally, an ordinance of the council requires 5 yes votes. If those petitions are certified, it would require 6 yes votes instead of 5. Staff is also recommending approval of this application.
Thank you. At this point, before we move on, I think it's pertinent to let our citizens speak and then have council ask questions of Mr. Tyson should they arise. So we will move on to those who wish to speak against this item. The first one I have is Mr. Steve Forbes of 115 East Miller Road, sir.
Your rules say that you have to have people speak for it first.
In the council, we've always had people speak in favor first, or I'm sorry, against first, and then in favor. In council, every public hearing or anything we've had those speak against it first, and then those in favor. Yes.
Unlike planning and zoning.
If that's how planning and zoning does it, I'm telling you how we do it at the city council. Mr. Forbes.
Against, correct?
Correct.
Okay, I'm Steve Forbes, and I moved to Miller Road 51 years ago. Moved to 540 South Main, which sits at the corner of Miller Road and South Main, back in 1967, and a residential area. And that's kind of the main focus and the main thoughts that I have. Growing up there on Miller Road, whenever you look at the Miller Road area, and if you talk to Mr. Bashirs, who's been around for a long time, it's quite different now than what it was back then. but the area that I lived in, my parents built a house on at 540 South Main, was property given to them that belonged to my great-grandfather, who lived 2 doors down. My grandfather lived next door to them, 1 door down, so going back to the 30s and 40s, we're talking about residential area that my family lived in. I built a house myself, and my wife and I did in 1997, and so for the last 21 years, we've been residents at 115 East Miller Road. And the number one thing that I'm talking about and looking at that impacts me, impacts my mother, which I'm sorry was unable to be here tonight. She's having heart surgery tomorrow in the hospital, so she would have been here. She was at the last meeting. But the number one area that I want to address is just the residential area. And this is a residential area that's close to me, it's close to my heart, it's close to my family, as well as it is with neighbors that live in that area. I have nothing against apartment complexes and senior housing and things like that, but not in a residential area. This is an area that I've lived in all my life, and it means something to me. And there are plenty of areas, around the city of Republic where these villas could go that would not impact individual homeowners. And when you start talking about homeowners, you're talking about people who have spent their lives there. My wife and I have lived there, like I said, since '97. Our children grew up there. My family's been there, like I said, since the late 30s, early 40s. And it's always been a residential area. And I just don't want to see that changed just to put something in there because we've got a greenway where we can, put in 40 units. Because I don't think it's fair to the people that have lived there all their lives. I don't think it's fair for the people that have lived there, for 10 and 15 years. Because they moved to that area as a residential area. They didn't move to that area being an area where they knew that it was going to be, apartment complexes, senior housing, and things like that. So I just hope that you will take that into consideration because there are a lot of people out there that it's near and dear to their heart. And when you start talking about, what people have and what they've invested in their homes and things that happen with their property values on their homes and things like that, it means something to them. That's why we're there. That's why we've been here. So I hope that whenever you all make a decision, that you'll make a decision based on the thoughts and the lives of the homeowners that have lived in that area for most of their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we have Miss Leslie Forbes, 115 East Miller Road as well.
First of all, I just want to say that inevitably something is going to go into that 5-acre tract. And I just ask that you please make sure that it's going to be something keeping up with the flow of our neighborhood. This is our neighborhood. One of the best things about our neighborhood is our homes aren't built one on top of the other. We don't stand in between 2 houses and reach out and touch one on each side. Our neighborhood is generally peaceful except for the road noise. Main Street and Miller Road are high traffic areas. And I just ask that you please make your decision, maybe what's best for our neighborhood, not what's going to be best to make the developer the most amount of money or the City of Republic the most amount of money, but what's good for our families. And just imagine if it were your neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So we have Mrs. Betty North.
I only have one phobia, and that's public speaking, so please bear with me. I am asking you to please review the info provided in your packet regarding the low-income housing tax credit. Page 2 states that the proposed housing developments must provide housing for low-income persons and families. This is confusing to me. Will there be any families living in the multifamily? Not supposed to be. Will all of the units be low-income? Will all 40 units be occupied only by low-income seniors? Please research the low-income tax credit programs on your computer. I think you will be interested in how the tax credit program works. Developers sometimes say that their development will be great for the city because of the restrictions that they will provide. Based on what city planners in other cities have told me, a city usually does not enforce restrictions. So as far as protecting the investment of the citizens in the existing neighborhood, apparently restrictions are not effective. I have heard from other property owners that restrictions are often not enforced unless homeowners have to hire an attorney. Please do not pass this PDD thinking that from now on, the only occupants of the multifamily units will be people over the age of 55. As I understand it, the PDD's restrictions for this project only provide for the protection of developers and any future owners and tenants, not the owners of neighboring properties. To me, the most concerning part of the restrictions is the part that says the restriction shall run with the land until an ordinance is passed by the city, either amending the PDD or the real estate is rezoned. You might think that would never, ever happen. Don't be so sure. That is precisely what almost happened with another planned development in Republic not very long ago. In that case, the developer came back to the city asking to have his PDD rezoned. That happened after 3/4 of his development was already built. So remember this, restrictions are only in effect until they are no longer in effect. Please give weighted consideration to the number of notarized protest statements of the neighbors whose property is contiguous to the planned development. If you consider the linear feet between the neighborhood properties and the proposed PDD, I estimate that 97% of those property owners signed the petition forms. Here's a property, the part in green, the owners have filled out protest forms. Now a few words of planned developments and their pitfalls. In 2008, I suggested that the City of Republic follow NICS's lead and suspend any new zoning of residential planned developments until an extensive review was made and changes were implemented. A spokesman for NICSA had said developers were using NICS's planned unit developments just to get more lots. He said you basically had smaller lots and not much green space. I think having the option for a planned development is an enticement for developers that is very hard to resist. It allows for special treatment and/or special waivers for their projects. The city needs to be very careful of the optics involved in PDD zoning, especially this particular one, considering its location and size in the surrounding neighborhood, as well as the planning criteria outlined in the city's planning documents. Back in 2009, the city proposed a suspension in the consideration of new or expired proposals in certain multifamily residential districts. In City Resolution R21, city officials outlined 8 concerns, and these were, the city officials outlined 8 concerns or negative impacts on the city related to multifamily zoning. These included the negative effects on the transportation system and the environmental resources. Also mentioned was concern over potential for creation of blight and substandard housing. From my viewpoint, the most important concerns the document listed were these 2: the aesthetic and economic effects on the property in adjacent neighborhoods, and also the continuity of the land use plan. These are valid concerns which were written by city officials, and they came from the city's own document, R21.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, now moving on to those in favor, Mr. Gabriel Woodman.
I'd like to start off by thanking the City Council for reviewing our proposal for this PDD application. Our nation as a whole is aging, and this demographic is normally not serviced. It's not serviced specifically in areas, rural areas. Baby boomers make up more than any other generation of U.S. assets and over half of the U.S. discretionary spending. And so if you don't provide quality housing for this demographic, Republic in general can miss out on this economic opportunity. We've done a preliminary capture rate, and that's in your packets. It's 11.8%, which is fairly good. We expect it to be lower than that when we do our full market study. But what our preliminary capture rate tells us is two different things. It tells us, one, that Republic has a 400 unit deficit in their supply, or a 400 unit demand, and that we have a major shortage of affordable senior housing in Republic. Miller Court will consist of 40 units, as Garrett had said. We feel like this is the best use of the site. It has it has existing amenities already before we even build it, with its proximity to the recreational center and its proximity to both health clinics, Mercy and Cox. The proposed PDD will actually reduce the amount of traffic and burden on our infrastructure as a city compared to the current zoning that it has. Normally you would think that would be different on single family, but even though we're putting more units on the property, seniors are just typically not as much of a burden, and we put that traffic study in your packets. Our civil team has done calculations as well for our application, and the burden for the water and sewer will be less. And Miller Road is the type of traffic way we really look for when we do these types of developments. It has a turn lane, which is good for seniors. It gives them time to stop and an opportunity to turn. Seniors typically are used to living in a neighborhood environment, and that's essentially what we're trying to create there, is a sense of community. That's why we like the Loop Drive. The market, or the housing supply we have in here in Republic is lacking, well, number one, it's lacking a number of units, but it's also lacking energy efficiency and accessibility. And so any type of development we do that's an affordable tax credit development, we're held to a lot higher standards than any type of market rate unit. As far as energy efficiency, they all have to be NGBS, green certified, and accessibility. They have to meet all ADA and UFAS requirements. Our development will have 1 and 2 bedroom units, and a lot of times we like to pride ourselves in providing amenities. We can't always do that because of the project budget, but we like to pride ourselves in providing amenities and finishes of projects that are, if not at the level market rate, even better. In closing, we believe this is the best use of the property. It's cohesive with the surrounding areas. The senior development is the best use of the property instead of single family or multifamily. It has an efficient infrastructure plan. We feel like it melds well with Miller, and it'll produce a lot less burden. And our design encompasses a sense of community. But most importantly, this development will, help fill a gap, which, won't fill all of it, but it'll help fill a gap in affordable senior housing, quality affordable senior housing that Republic is desperately needing. That's, I don't know if you do questions, but.
Yeah, we will have Mr. Tyson come up and then.
Thank you.
Actually, we have another card here. Thank you, sir. Ms. Jerry Poole. I suppose if I need to tell anybody about the 5 minutes, it'll be Miss Jerry Poole. I'm just kidding.
I can't tell time.
I'll tell it for you. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I have been here 38 years. Came here in 37, be 38 in January. Came here in 1981. The population was 4,220, 280. They had one low cost senior house, and that was over on Anderson Street. One bank, which was right here, and one savings and loan. The 1990 census was over 6,000. It's continued to grow. Republic has grown, and we've watched it grow. I respect these people that have concerns, but there's other concerns for seniors that we need someplace that we can have housing that is more efficient for us than what we've got right now. We have very little. And I work at the senior center, and I get a lot of calls. They ask, what do we have for seniors in Republic? Not a lot. Not a lot of places. And when they go and put their application in, they wait 2 years to get a place to, even in these apartments that we already have. I estimate, I'm just guessing, probably our population has grown to somewhere around 16,000, 17,000. That means that we need to be more considerate of providing places that so people won't have to go to Springfield, Marionville, other places to have an apartment that they can be in and serve. I have a list. I have personally 44 people that I have talked to personally. I even talked to Jim personally, and I don't have his name down, about the need for a development like Dolph is trying to do in Republic. I have not had one person say that that we don't need it. Most of them are elated to think that we would have something like that wherever it's located. There is a definite need for senior housing, and we need to look to the future, and I ask the council to consider this PDD for their approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are everyone. That's everyone who wishes to speak, Mr. Tyson. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to council based on everything that you've heard for any questions, comments, or discussion. Mr. Ed?
Did you say that there were deed restrictions on this?
A deed restriction,
A deed,
yes.
so a warranty deed restriction, or in the?
I don't know that that's the title. Is it warranty deed restriction?
It's similar to a restrictive covenant that runs with the land as
So
far
it's
as
the
what the
covenant
land can be.
restrictions.
Yeah, it's similar to what you'd see in some of the newer housing additions where they limit it to all brick or things along those lines. It runs with the land, and it only allows for certain purposes for that land to be used for.
Okay.
And that's in your packet there.
Questions, comments, or just Mr. Shears?
Okay, if that were the case, I know in my area that I live in, we have restrictions. But also, if I would have a complaint to a neighbor, it's up to me to hire a lawyer, attorney to, to check into this. The city wouldn't do it. Is that correct?
I don't know what your deed restriction says. This deed restriction specifically allows the city to enforce it. So probably your deed restriction does not allow the city to enforce it, and probably the city would not enforce it because it's not related to a zoning issue. But this deed restriction does allow the city to enforce it based upon the land. Also, the city would be allowed to enforce it based upon the zoning of the land. So if the developer goes against what the zoning of the land is in this PDD, he can be prosecuted in our courts here for those violations also.
So the city is the one who has to enforce it?
Correct, yes.
Do we have any other areas that are similar to this, where the city would have to enforce it?
I don't know what other deed restrictions the city has ever entered into. I'm not aware of any that the city would be a party to where the city is specifically allowed to enforce it. This one we are specifically allowed to.
I just never heard of a situation where a city would enforce deed restrictions.
You know, it's not uncommon in a situation like this, especially when the PDD is present, because the PDD allows for very limited usage based upon their development plan. If this were just a rezone to a multifamily or something along those lines, there obviously would not be any deed restrictions that go along with that as far as age or anything along those lines. However, due to the unique circumstances of this PDD and what it is going to be used for, that's why this deed restriction is going to be in place, and the ordinance specifically says that no permits can be issued in this case until this deed restriction is filed with Greene County and a copy is provided to us.
So it'd be up to the city then financially?
To enforce it?
To enforce it.
Yes.
Okay.
Charlie, I can think of only one other case throughout the city where the city is in that same position with restrictive covenants, and that's Modern Tractors Frisco Square development, which is also a PDD where the city had entered into a development agreement and the covenants and restrictions were incorporated into that agreement, and there were some things there for the city to enforce. I'd say the normal situation is that what you find in your neighborhood restrictions are things that are above and beyond what the city's zoning requires. You wouldn't need to put them in your restrictions if they were what the city already requires, because the city doesn't need your restrictions to enforce what's already in the code. If a neighborhood wants to do something above and beyond what our code requires, that's where those restrictions come into play. And since they are above and beyond what is required by our ordinances, the city is typically not involved in the enforcement of those. If the city wished to enforce those types of things, the proper avenue would be to go ahead and adopt that as an ordinance rather than, just do it restriction by restriction.
So for the city to enforce the deed restriction, would it take a complaint by a resident for that to happen?
That's probably the only way we would find out, but I don't know that it would be absolutely necessary for that to be the case.
How would the city know there was a problem with the deed restrictions?
We'd have to come upon that information somehow. So either it's reported to us, somehow we have to come to that information.
Yeah, somehow you'd have to know.
Yeah. Find it highly unlikely we're going to be knocking on doors, checking IDs or anything like that. But if that's the way we operate.
I'm just thinking
in most cases.
I are a senior citizen, okay? And but I can understand if you lived in a situation like that in development, that for some seniors it might be very difficult to, first of all, to know who to file a complaint with. And even if you did know who to file it with, you still have probably problems in doing that.
Sure.
Just some thoughts.
Mr. Sell.
The future land use is low density, correct?
Correct, yes. 1 to 6 dwelling units per acre.
Mr. Dyke.
2 questions. One, is there a limit on how many can occupy the unit?
No, I don't believe so.
And in some of the comments was, are these all going to be government subsidized low income?
I do not know the answer to that. The city is certainly not a party to
right.
That particular program.
Mr.
There would, sorry to answer, there would likely be an occupancy restriction at some point imposed by the building and or fire codes for these buildings that would put an upper limit. But no, this does not, nor does the city's regular zoning code include a limit on, you know, how large a family might be or something like that. That gets to be a little awkward for the obvious reasons.
I was saying, you know, as being a senior, my wife and I, you know, there's two of us, but if we had, you know, there's an age, but could there be like another couple move in there with you, you know, where you'd end up with more people than what, you know, is it like single family or is it multiple, you know, per unit? I guess that would be my question.
So a lot of that depends on who the people are and how they're related to each other, I guess, at the end of the day, to determine whether they constitute a family. That's a difficult question to answer, not just for this development, but just for your house. Right. That's a difficult question to answer. How many people can live in your place or someone else's? That becomes difficult.
Well, the reason, I mean, my asking was the fact that where it is a senior development, I understand, you know, you couldn't be under the age to live there, but like if you had, you're not husband and wife or a child, if you're 90 years old and you got a child 60, they can live there. But if to have people who are not siblings, I guess you'd say, of the parent, where you would end up with multiple persons in the residence, which could cause issues, I would see.
Yeah, I suppose you would come back to how the city's zoning code defines a family, which, don't quote me on this, but I think it's people related by consanguinity, blood relationship, and then 2 or 3 persons not related by blood relationship. And then you get beyond that, it's no longer a family as defined by our zoning code. So I suppose that would be another limitation per unit.
I guess it could be something to be set by the developer, you know, in their contract, but as far as city goes, it would, okay, thank you.
And just to answer a little bit more, it would be very difficult from a legal side to enforce how many occupants can be inside of certain buildings. There's certain federal laws dealing with discrimination in housing, things along those lines that could put the city in a very difficult situation, plus trying to determine it. I'm assuming you wouldn't want somebody to tell you how many people live in your house. We can't go knock on the door and enter the house and see, plus the federal laws are in place, so that'd be very difficult to have in place and actually enforce also.
Okay.
Mr. Beshears.
This may be another question that would be hard to answer. Most of you know I'm a teacher. It's unbelievable the number of grandparents that are raising their kids. This year I have 4 or 5 at least, I can think of just off the top of my head, that live with their grandparents for various reasons. Okay, so you have this subdivision we're talking about here. Can kids live with grandparents in this subdivision?
I don't believe, Scott, do you recall off the top of your head that?
The deed restriction that is in place for this does not allow anybody under the age of 55 to reside in the facility. So no, it would not allow children to reside there. Normally, we cannot enforce any type of regulations that deal with children living there, anything along those lines, because there's certain federal laws dealing with housing discrimination. However, there's a specific federal law that exempts senior living facilities such as this from those type of regulations, and I'm assuming that's why the developer has it in this case, because there is a specific exemption for it. Also, it's my understanding from hearing the presentations in the past from the developer that in order for them to get certain housing credits, everybody has to be over the age of 55. But it is in the deed restriction that nobody under 55 can reside there.
Okay, so currently then, a grandparent having a child with them, the city would bring charges against the parents or the grandparents?
No, because they're going to be renting the property. That would be first fall on the developer. the developer would first have to enforce it. If they did not enforce it, then yes, it would fall upon the city to enforce it, either through some type of civil remedy such as an injunction, or if they're using our court system for a zoning law violation.
If that were to happen, would the developer then be in, could they lose the tax credits that were issued?
I can't speak to the tax credits in Missouri. I'm not that familiar with them. I'm assuming so, because there's specific requirements for it. I don't believe that they would give them tax credit and say, but you can do other stuff. I'm assuming that they're very strict, but I cannot speak specifically for those.
Okay. Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns, discussion from council? Mr. Jones.
The infrastructure or services, water, sewer, and it is addressed here in the bill, is primarily sewer, having being the navigable all flow towards the Schuler Ridge lift station. And with the additional development at the trails at Valley Park and all that, we don't foresee this as being any kind of a load burden on that to cause us to do an upgrade at that facility, for that facility anytime soon.
No, this data was all reviewed by the city's wastewater department, and there is sufficient capacity to serve this proposal.
Anything else from council? Seeing nothing, remember this is a first read. If you have any questions in the meantime, between now and December 11th, please get with Mr. Tyson. Thank you, sir. Guess you're staying there. Need a motion and a second for the first reading of bill number 18-44.
Motion. Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Ms. Brenda.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, approving a special use permit to operate a real estate office in a residential zoning district located at 1101 East Elm Street to Alex and Marcia Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson.
Yes, this bill would authorize the issuance of a special use permit to Alex and Marcia Clark to use the real property located at 1101 East Elm Street as a professional real estate office. The subject property is located at the northeast corner of the intersection of Elm and Lynn Street, both of which are secondary arterials in the city system. The site is approximately 1/2 acre in size. It's presently located within the medium-density single-family residential zoning district, abbreviated as R1M. It currently contains a principal single-family residential building as well as a detached garage. If approved, the special use permit will authorize the permittees to use the land and buildings for the purpose of conducting a real estate office land use. The terms of the special use permit include that the permit is non-transferable, meaning that it does not run with the land and cannot be sold or passed on to someone else. The permit expires upon the termination of the special use or upon the lawful revocation by the City Council. Unlike a rezone, the special use only permits this single use. If it were a rezone, which is what the City Council normally hears, as you recall, that permits a broad range of uses that can be conducted. Special use permit is different in that it only authorizes the single use, or I guess there could be a case where there's multiple uses, but in this case it's just one single use, and that's the only use that is authorized. It also includes in this particular case permission to install signage as illustrated in the diagrams that you all have in your packet. That's two small real estate signs, one on each street frontage. I believe you have that diagram enclosed in your packet for your viewing. The Planning and Zoning Commission held a public hearing on this application and voted unanimously to recommend the approval of the special use permit with the signage condition included with that. Staff is also recommending the approval of this application, and after further consideration following that P&Z meeting, staff is actually recommending an additional condition which is not contained in the ordinance you have in front of you. So if council wants to add this condition based on staff's recommendation, it'll have to be an amendment to the ordinance. If council has that desire, what I would recommend is for a council member to coordinate with Scott to have an amendment drafted that can be added in here, and then it can be amended at the second reading. That condition is this: to restrict Outdoor storage of equipment or commercial vehicles with a gross vehicle weight rating of over 14,000 pounds to prohibit that. There were some concerns brought forth at P&Z that established are warranted about what's the potential here for large commercial vehicles to be parked or stored, or somehow for there to be materials or equipment stored outdoors where it would be unsightly. It's normal for this is a type of use you could do in your house right now. You don't have a real estate office, but as home occupation, you don't need a special use to do that. You can do that anywhere in the city, and that contains a restriction that you can't store stuff outside. So we thought we would just bring that over and apply it to this, just like it would be applied as if it were a normal home occupation, just to eliminate that concern. And so, like I said, if council wishes to add that condition, it would need to be done by an amendment.
Thank you. We're going to move on. We have some people who'd like to. We have no one who requested to speak against it. So we'll move on to those who wish to speak in favor. That is Mr. Alex Clark. Mr. Clark, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Like I said, I'm Alex Clark. I'm the current owner of the property, and like I said, we brought this issue before council a couple months ago for a rezoning issue, and there were some concerns that were brought up, and so we feel like the special use permit is addressing those concerns. Not only is it the concerns of some of the people that were brought those up, but it was also our concern as well to maintain the residential nature of the neighborhood. It's not our intent to scare people with a commercial development, which was what the CO zoning was. It was still our intent for the property is still exactly the same, to maintain it as a landmark for the city. The special use permit is very, very restrictive. The CO zoning is very restrictive, but this is even farther beyond that. It still allows us to use the property like we would like to. Like I said, the big thing there, like Garrett mentioned, is that, we don't live there. We don't plan to use it as a residence, but we would just like to work from there like any other person would. We don't have plans to make it a big commercial development, have unsightly signs or anything like that. It just allows us to use the property for which we would like to intend to do it for. So, like I said, the special use permit, we've kind of gone through it. The city staff's been great to work with to explain all the caveats of that. The only thing that might be different, as Garrett mentioned, was the 2 signs. And because of most homes in Republic would just have one, they're not corner lots, they're on a regular lot. So, and also looking at the traffic sight distances, if we were just allowed the 1 sign, there might be an issue if we put it on the very corner. So this allows us to split it and put it more where the sidewalks are off to each side of it. So that way it's not meant to get traffic. I'm not really looking at that. It's also to maintain the corners view and stuff like that, or potential obstructions or something like that. But that'll all be reviewed by the city again through their sign use permit for that. So like I said, we're in favor of it. We think it's best for the city, best use for the property. It allows us to use the property, to maintain it. We've already put a lot of restoration work into it to beautify the property. Our intent is to make sure that it's a land park and a beautiful place for years to come. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tyson. Okay, questions, comments, concerns, or discussion from council? I have 2.
Go ahead, John.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you. The original vote by P&Z, I'm talking about the rezoning vote. Do you recall what that was as far as a recommendation from P&Z, what that vote was?
The rezone, the prior rezone.
Yes.
That was I believe that was 4-3. 4 no's, 3 yeses.
Okay.
To recommend against the rezone, and that was several months ago.
Okay. And then, so that was placed before council, and I believe the vote on that was 6 opposition and 2 in favor. I'd have to look back at.
That's correct.
That's correct.
And the planning and zoning was 3 ayes, 4 nays.
So, okay, what that was, and this current, for this proposal from P&Z, what was the vote?
It was 5-0. Yes,
Okay.
5 yes,
Okay.
0 no.
We had several citizens come and speak that night in opposition to, and the main theme of what each of them spoke about was the residential nature of that. There is not a commercial, the closest non-residential entity is a church, Nazarene Church down Miller, or I'm sorry, down Lynn, and so that opposition was pretty strong to there being a business. I don't recall there being a lot of opposition or discussion within this council that there was concern about future use of that property. It was about this use for that property. And in that vote, it failed 6-2. I don't see this as any different, except for some restrictions. I'm going to have to get into it a lot more, and I will. But to me, this, and I'm a little surprised we don't have citizens here talking about this, because I don't think this satisfies. It doesn't satisfy a couple that called me, let me tell you that. So I'm going to have to do a lot more on this before our next meeting. That's all I'm saying.
Mr. South.
My question would be, you know, as a special use permit, we talk about a real estate office, but I mean, if the owner was to sublease it to someone else that is in the realm of real estate, where do we draw the line of what is real estate, what is not? Any construction trades? What does a special use permit do for that? Any subleasing?
I think there's some clear ways to define that, but within real estate, a professional, you know, using as a professional office, I mean, certainly you can't bring other uses in there that are not real estate offices, and you know, maybe like a sublease type or something like that. That would not be permissible. But within the confines of the real estate profession, there could be some subleases, I suppose. And as the ordinance is presently, there are no conditions relating to that. So if that were something council wanted to, the conditions as it is now, those are there. So like I said earlier, if those are something council wants addressed, the time to do that would be to get with Scott between now and the second reading and potentially discuss what that may look like in terms of language.
And then from the letter from the owner, you know, sales, leasing, property management, and construction management. Now, construction management can be, you know, various things. So I just want to make sure we know what it is. So.
Yeah, and so we get this, we run into this often on the home occupation side of it, because all of these things we're talking about, you can, like I said, you can do from your home now. You could do from your home now without getting a special use permit. And so a lot of times the question is, well, I want to do this construction business, and it's qualified by that word office. So I mean, if it's not an office use, it's not permissible. So that's why, just to be extra clear, staff is recommending that prohibition on storing equipment or bringing commercial vehicles or anything like that, just to shore up that this is a professional office use, not to be a base of operations for construction or something where you've got a bunch of employees reporting, then to go out in the field to build stuff or something like that. That would not be permissible. But if that's something council wants to shore up, like I said, those can be conditions added.
Mr. Dykeman.
But now if he was, the permit though would only be good for him. If he subleased it and had nothing to do with the new operation, would the permit still be good?
I believe as long as that use is a real estate office use, that would be permissible.
Unless it's restricted.
That's why I would recommend getting with the city attorney to talk through those issues. I don't know if you could restrict and say, oh, you own the property, but you can't sublease for a use that's permitted. Yeah, that's something I would want Scott's feedback on before I gave you a firm response.
Our ordinance is the whole purpose of a special use permit is to protect the surrounding areas, the property values, to keep the character as it is, yet allow a certain use for it. The way that we enforce those are through certain restrictions that are made on the use of the land in the ordinance in and of itself. So as Garrett is speaking about, if there's any concerns that you guys have, your constituents have, anything like that, you know, you can get with me, I can help you draft a potential amendment that can be presented to council at the second reading to somewhat limit more this, if that's what makes you, if that's what you want to do as far as this bill is concerned. But that's why we have the special use permit. A zoning just allows every single use that's allowed under it. A special use permit is we limit up what they can be used in order to protect the surrounding properties.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns from council?
Mayor, I had three calls on this, and to put it very simply, the calls I received are keep businesses, keep commercial out of residential areas. I don't want it next door. And that's pretty well the comment that I had 3 times this last week. But just, you know, I like my residential area. Keep the business away from it. Keep it out. Don't let it infiltrate. And that's about as simple as you can put it. And that may be why we voted last time. I'm not sure the way the vote went with the 6, you know, against it, is that some of us feel like, you know, a residential area is kind of sacred. That's where we live. We don't want a business next door to us. I think we need to think very seriously about where you live right now. If the house on either side of you across the street wanted a special use permit or some other type of commercial, you know, classification, how would you feel about it?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Ann?
Could you tell me how different this special use permit is in comparison to one that we passed prior that was for a daycare?
Just different generally, or?
Yeah, like.
So it's common that daycares request this because the state will license you. So in those cases, usually what you end up with is there's a limit of you can care for up to 10 children at any given time. So if you're looking at the differences that are important to zoning decisions, which are those land use impacts, impacts on infrastructure, you know, visual impacts. So how you compare that to real estate office in terms of traffic generation, that's a higher generator of traffic. In terms of noise, that's hard to say, but noise is commonly a complaint we get during those special use for daycares. It's not a complaint after the daycare opens usually, but going into it, people are worried about the noise. So I'd say they're roughly equivalent, but if anything, certainly the impacts on infrastructure are greater for the daycare than they are for this.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns? Or conversation from council? Seeing none, remember this is a first read. Please get with Mr. Tyson or Mr. Ison. Tyson or Ison. If you have any questions or would like to suggest any amendments to that bill. Okay, moving on to, need a motion and a second for the first reading of bill number 18-45.
Motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0, Ms. Brenda.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, amending Chapter 215, Republic City Code, Offenses, Article 6, Offenses concerning weapons and firearms, Section 215.840, Weapons, Carrying Concealed, Other Unlawful Use, by amending Paragraph G, Subparagraph 3, to extend the sunset date for hunting in certain agricultural areas of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Ison.
Since the city consolidated with Brookline, we have had an exception to our unlawful use statute or ordinance here that has allowed for certain hunting activities to take place within certain areas of the Brookline area. I believe that was part of our original agreement when we consolidated with Brookline that lasts for a certain number of years. That number of years expired several years ago. However, 2 times before, the council has taken up this exception before to our ordinance and has approved it before for 2 years terms. They were in 2016 before, and 2008, I believe, before. If you look at the ordinance before the council members today, you'll see the only change is in section 3 there under subsection D, and that just extends it from 2018 to 2020. I talked with the police chief. He is not aware of any problems that have happened in that area due to this exception that we have to our ordinances dealing with the unlawful use of a weapon. I will tell council members, because the most common question I get from citizens on this is, can I do it? And the answer is always, this is only an exception to our ordinances. You still have to comply with all state, federal conservation laws. This does not supersede any of those. It is just an exception to our ordinance that allows hunting in certain areas of the Brookline area. It does not allow hunting in general, in the entire Brookline area, just certain areas in Brookline.
Okay, any questions, comments, or concerns from Mr. Ison? The first one we don't have anybody to speak on.
Now, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Is it, is it only handguns and shotguns that are allowed? Is that what that means?
Yes.
So like, not deer hunting per se? And that?
Are you talking about like with a bow?
No, she's talking about like
No, I'm
with
talking
a high-powered
like
rifle.
yeah, the rifles.
It would allow the discharge of the firearms.
Oh, okay.
So firearms are defined also in the ordinance. So yeah, basically any type of firearms that would allow to be used in.
Oh, okay.
But to Mr. N's, it's pretty specific to the discharge of handguns or shotguns there,
Yeah.
which is not a deer hunting weapon in Missouri.
No.
So that
can be.
Someone couldn't use like some 308 or.
Joey wanted some kind of 44 or 41 or something kind of.
If you look
handgun.
under.
I was like, what in the heck?
If you look under section D there, shall not apply to those as long as the discharge of a firearm takes place. So that would be where the term firearms would come from. My interpretation would be, obviously, if we wanted to limit it just to handguns or shotguns, we can do that. I could amend section G to allow it, but when you have two conflicting sections that might be in conflict, the more general one would apply. So,
I was reading this, that this was that handguns and shotguns are the only ones that the exception allows for.
Yeah.
Is that not correct?
well, if you look under the first section G, under A,
Okay.
You'll say the discharge of firearms. The more
Okay,
general term is used there.
So what's the purpose of number 2 then, if it's already covered in G?
I honestly can't tell you. I did not write this. Why would it be specifically to those? I don't know if there was a reason for it back then. I honestly cannot tell you what the reason would have been.
I mean, it would seem to me that the reason would be that there are some residential neighborhoods in that area, while there are still a lot of agricultural areas, and a handgun or a shotgun, the ammunition, the round's not gonna travel as far
Right.
as a 308.
Right.
So if there is a concern as far as that, I can amend it further, or council members could offer an amendment to amend under section G further to specifically allow it to take out firearms and specifically allow in there only certain ones to be used so that there is no misunderstanding when it comes to if we wanted to prosecute somebody under this ordinance.
Any comments on that from council?
Yeah, I think something does need to be put in there, only because the verbiage earlier speaks about for the purposes of hunting. And so someone might take that, oh, I thought I could use my 270, my 30-06. I believe that number 2, I think you're correct, is that it was, as Maristry said, it was to limit the fact because the distance traveled, certainly, especially for a shotgun, the effective range is very, very short compared to a deer rifle. So, to me, it's a little bit confusing. It could be confusing from somebody who's reading it.
I agree. And if that's what council wants, I can draft an amendment. If the council member wants to put it forward at the next meeting, I'll have that available.
Okay. I'll get with you on that.
Mr. Russell?
Why is it sunsetting?
It's always had a sunset in it provision before. My understanding, this was originally written to the fact that we anticipated a lot more expansion in the Brookline area, and as the Brookline area expanded like it's doing now, that area specifically in Brookline that's covered under this, where hunting is allowed, would no longer be that type of area where hunting should be allowed. So that's why there was initially a sunset in it. And I believe every time previously when council has looked at it, they've looked at the area and the growth and development around that area to decide whether or not it's appropriate again. That's why there's a sunset set. Now, it's important to remember, although if council decides to extend this into 2020, if there's some other development that occurs before then, council can change it before that 2020 date. You're not set in stone for that date. And I believe that's why in 2016 they started changing it to 2 years, was because of the growth that we're seeing in the Brookline area.
Okay. Any other discussion? this as well as a first read, so if you have any questions, please get with Mr. Ison, or if you would like to suggest an amendment prior to December 11th meeting. Moving on to bill number 18-46, I need a motion and a second for the first read.
Motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Ms. Brenda.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, imposing a city sales tax to provide general fund expenses for the benefit of the city, including additional public safety resources to hire additional firefighters and police officers, improving public infrastructure, including City Hall, and an additional citywide cleanup, calling an election in the City of Republic, Missouri on the question of imposing said sales tax, designating the time for holding said election, and authorizing and directing the city clerk to give notice to the county clerk of said election.
Thank you, Ms. Brenda. Mr. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I mentioned during the budget workshop, and that the city had in 1981 imposed a 1% sales tax that is currently on the books. In 1981 and in 2001, the citizens voted to re-up that 1 cent sales tax without a sunset. At present, that tax, as if you've seen in 2016, the city's reserves or financial position after expenses was roughly $2,000. In 2017, it was roughly $45,000. And in 2019, it's projected to be $17,000. As you can see, pretty much we're about 10 firefighters short. We're about 9 police officers short. We have a deficit when it comes to the City Hall building. This building was built in 1888. The building across the street was built in 1901. The Public Works building was built in 1901. We projected and actually hired an engineer that came in and evaluated these facilities, and the need to bring them just up to code is somewhere in the proximity of $800,000. And so also included in there is in the issue, which is not mentioned in the language in and of itself, is approximately $400,000 worth of street funding that is currently available or not available for our street department. We have over 420 lane miles of streets that we have to maintain in the community, and have less than $200,000 a year to maintain it. So if you drive around town and you see the condition of the streets, having $200,000 a year to maintain that, plus making the upgrades that we're doing, borrowing money to build a street is not the best approach for taking care of it. So that tax that was imposed in 1981, roughly at today's present day, 80% of that tax is utilized to take care of both our police and fire departments. But we're about 10, like I said before, we're about 10 officers short just on the fire today. We're 9 officers short on the police department today. And so dealing with this building and what the needs of that, we believe this is the best option moving forward. I believe that also that it's important to note that what the citizens did and what they attempted to do, or what they did do in 1986, was the city does not collect personal property tax. So we do not collect the personal property tax for vehicles in our community at this present time. But what that was done in 1986 was there was a ballot for a transportation tax that gave that was considered, quote, a trade-off. And so I believe that that's important to note that that is just a provision that the city does not collect and would be very beneficial in providing for our public safety and for our infrastructure needs. The other thing worth noting, we are the only other city other than Springfield that has our own fire service. Every city has a fire department, but most of them are under a fire district. And each of those cities are paying roughly, it varies, but on average about 72 cents on property tax to pay for that. Whereas in Republic, we do not collect for that. And so that roughly estimates about $2.7 million a year, which I project, and what we projected is about the shortfall by which we need in our general fund budget. And so it's just as in any household, like Debbie mentioned, the finance director mentioned, having a $20 million budget and having $2,000 left over, or $17,000 left over, or $45,000 left over is not an adequate amount to address the needs that we have in the community. So this is what we believe as a staff is the best option, is to present to the voters in April a 1% ballot issue, and staff is recommending your approval. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, discussion? Mr. Self?
I just, again, want to say I appreciate the transparency, and then also, whenever we talked about our previous tax that we did, transparency with that as we're accumulating money and we're going to do the city beautification effort, and just, kind of what we've said we're going to do, we're starting to do it and we follow through with that. I feel like this is one of those that we have a lot of needs, and so with this tax, we can help shore up a lot of things. But we don't want to go into a lot of debt. The debt that we have is already more than enough, and so I just feel that with this tax that I appreciate I appreciate just being open and transparent. So going forward.
Any other questions, comments, or discussion? Seeing none, remember this is the first read. If you have any questions, please get with Mr. Cameron. In the meantime, December 11th. Moving on to resolutions. Resolution number 18-R-33, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, approving a preliminary plat of the Highway 60 Business Center, a commercial subdivision consisting of approximately 62 acres at the northern intersection of US Highway 60 and South Farm Road 103. I need a motion and a second.
Motion. Second.
Do I have?
Motion, second.
I have a motion and a second, okay. Mr. Tyson.
This preliminary plat is a major subdivision of approximately 60 acres located at the northwest corner of the intersection of US Highway 60 and Farm Road 103. The subject property is currently located within the city's general commercial zoning district, which is typically abbreviated as C2. The subdivision includes the platting of 10 commercial lots, all served by public streets, public water, and public sanitary sewer, also to be served by a stormwater management system that is comprised of both public and private elements. The subdivision has been under review by city staff in order to determine its compliance with the city's regulations. Through the course of that review, the city staff has identified a number of deficiencies, parts of this preliminary plat that do not conform to the city's subdivision regulations or to the city's zoning regulations in some way. A list of those deficiencies are included there in your packet. Upon the submittal of the version of the preliminary plat that you have before you tonight, the applicant requested that this be heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council, regardless of staff's findings in that area. So we provided you with that list. I'll just sort of generally describe them here, and I'll obviously be available to answer specific questions if you have any. But there's a failure to conform to the city's adopted transportation plan, specifically to conform to the city's adopted major thoroughfare plan in the layout of the streets. A failure to provide transportation infrastructure that complies with the subdivision regulations and with the International Fire Code. Lack of a turnaround for fire trucks is an example of that. A failure to provide an adequate study and design of the proposed intersection of US Highway 60 with Farm Road 103 and with the new right-in, right-out intersection that would be a result of this subdivision. What I mean there is MoDOT requires that any rebuilt or redeveloped or new intersections be accompanied by a traffic study that can demonstrate that the design of whatever that infrastructure is going to be adequate and safe and will provide an adequate level of service, and that is not the case for this current preliminary plat. A failure to provide water infrastructure that complies with the city's subdivision regs and with the International Fire Code, and a lack of a clear indication that the stormwater management will be designed to comply with the city's stormwater regulations. That latter one is not something that we're necessarily requiring a correction to for the preliminary plat, but merely just a mutual understanding with the developer that that's something that will have to be handled in the design phase. So given all of those deficiencies that remain, staff is not recommending the approval of this preliminary plat. The Planning and Zoning Commission voted unanimously also to not recommend the approval of this preliminary plat.
Thank you. We do not have anyone wishing to speak against, but we do have Mr. Tyler McCollum wishing to speak in favor. Mr. McCollum, you have 5 minutes.
I really think we need a clock on top of the wall.
Well, it would probably make it more comfortable for me, so I don't have to be like, hey, your time's up.
Okay. I really appreciate you guys hearing us out tonight. I know there's a list of deficiencies. Part of them are, one of them I believe is our parallel road is not 440 feet away from 60 highway. It is all except for maybe 30-40 foot of it, which is 420 feet away. And the only reason it's not 440 is we curved into Farm Road 103. There is a good list of deficiencies, but some of them I think we could overcome. I don't think they're exactly 100% deal breakers. We've been working on this for a year and made it nowhere. We're here tonight because I want to bring it to you guys because I've just been spinning my wheels trying to find something. We've turned in several plats. We've made it nowhere. We've tried to deal with MoDOT. They really seemed no interest in wanting to do a stoplight, so then we continued to connect over to 103 because we were out of options. In my opinion, this is a huge deal for the city. I know tonight you guys had your budget. We're looking at 63 acres right now. There's 183 acres total in what we would like to do. I believe that could be a good revenue source for the city, which we obviously could use and help. I remember a few months ago when I was here and you guys sent out questionnaires to the city about what they were happy about, what they weren't happy about, and we could help with some of them where their biggest complaints were lack of jobs and no family entertainment really whatsoever. Well, we would love to see family entertainment businesses come into here, movie theaters, bowling alleys, restaurants, you know. On the job side of it, we have temporary jobs, you know, from all the construction. I mean, the infrastructure cost is in the millions of dollars alone just for infrastructure, let alone our permanent jobs from all of the things we can do. We've looked at, in Lot 2, we could fit a 40,000 square foot strip mall, which is a pretty decent sized strip mall that could hold lots of jobs for our local economy. You know, we're not just going to be bringing in money from our people here in town. We're going to be collecting money from people from other towns coming to our town that normally go to Springfield. You know, I don't know how many people you see drive on Friday nights, go down 60 Highway right past us all the way to Springfield. You know, I mean, it's just, I think it'd be a great thing for the city just all around to help our economy, help our people, you know, and my family's not some developing family, you know, I mean, I've ranched and rodeoed my whole life. I've never done this before. I've never developed anything before. I've never built anything before. And partially that's maybe why, because it took us a year to get to this point, because I'm new to it. I'm getting it all figured out. I'm not a pro at this. We're not looking to come in and make a couple bucks and dump and leave, and whatever happens with it, happens with it. Our goal is to retain as much ownership of it as possible, but some will be, you know, leased out to other businesses, and some franchises don't do lease deals. They only do purchase deals, you know. But, you know, we have planned on keeping a big hand in this to where we're not just going to let whatever happen and move on, you know. Both my grandparents graduated or went to Republic. My parents went to Republic. My brothers went to Republic. Me and my wife went to Republic. All of my brothers and their kids and my daughter go to Republic. We're in the community. We're not somebody just coming in wanting to make a couple bucks. I mean, we're invested in this. I live feet north of this project. I wouldn't be standing up here tonight if I didn't think it was great for the community, willing to be feet away from this, living, raising my daughter, and we have another daughter due in January. You know, I mean, I know we have some deficiencies, and I would love to correct part of them, but it was to my understanding that if I wanted to correct them, I had to start this process all over again. Well, I had to turn this in September to be here tonight. I'm just so worn out from trying to do such a lengthy process to get anything done that if it doesn't pass tonight and we have to start over, my best case is February to be back up here again. Absolute best case. Well, it doesn't seem like that long, but there's businesses coming in every day, and there's businesses coming into Springfield every day. You know, I believe every day that we're not doing this is just another opportunity we could be missing on. And I could be totally wrong. Nobody may be interested coming in at all. But I have a really good feeling that a lot of people, a lot of businesses want to come to Republic, and they have wanted for a long time, but it had been difficult for a while, which we have really overcame, or well, I shouldn't say we, you guys have overcame the difficulties of coming into Republic and doing businesses. And I should mention that Karen and Tyson have answered so many of my dumb questions and have been so helpful in helping me figure out answers that I don't know, because I've never done this before. And I've heard that used to, you know, it was hard to get stuff done. They have really answered a lot of questions because I had no idea what I was doing. But, I mean, I hope you guys like our plat. And we were kind of forced into going this way because we couldn't get anything else figured out. But I just think it'll be great for the city. And I just love to get the project started and start marketing it. And I can't do that until we have a plat. And thank you guys for your time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Tyson? This time we'll open it up for questions, comments, or discussion from council. Did you have a question? Go ahead, Mr.
Can changes be made to the plat after it goes through tonight, or is that it? Like, because you have these.
Yes, well, so obviously, if it, you said if it goes through tonight?
Well, like, if everything was to go through, would there still be things that we could change on this where they could meet what is required, what the shortcomings are?
No,
that you stated that.
Yeah, no, if it's approved in this form, that creates basically a guarantee to the developer that whatever's on that paper, that's what they can build. And so we would not be in a position to require those deficiencies to be corrected in that case.
Can we pass on contingency that this would be corrected?
I don't think so. I don't think there's a conditional approval here.
Right. This is a plat, so it's required to go through planning and zoning first. By my review of the deficiencies in this and the plat itself, if these deficiencies were to be all corrected, it would have to go back to planning and zoning because there were some definite changes to this plat. So I don't believe that even if council wanted to put a condition on the approval, that it could go that way because it has to go back to planning and zoning first.
But would he have to start the process all over again, like he was saying? So he would have to go back to.
He'd have to go back to planning and zoning, and they were given an option at planning and zoning. I want to make sure that's clear. They were given an option at planning and zoning if they wanted to table this or hold it and make any changes to it, and they said they wanted to go forward to council. Now, it can be sent back still to planning and zoning, but obviously if there's not going to be changes made to it, then there's really no point in kicking the ball down the road if they're not going to make changes at planning and zoning, because then we might be back here the same thing in January. So,
if I could just maybe add some perspective here. I think what you hear from Mr. McConnell is a bit of frustration describing the difficulties. Some of these deficiencies I think are relatively easy to correct. Some of them are, I think, going to be very difficult to correct. And so I think that's maybe where a lot of Mr. McConnell's frustration is coming from, is some of these are not easy fixes. For example, I think maybe what is somewhat unfortunate about this situation is their primary access, which is U.S. Highway 60, is an expressway that is presently carries a huge volume of traffic and is already congested. Intersecting a roadway like that for a new development is difficult under those conditions. Doing that traffic study and demonstrating to MoDOT and to the city that you can do that and do that efficiently and effectively under those current conditions is difficult. It's not for lack of effort on the part of the developer in this case, without any doubt. They studied it and were unable, apparently, to come up with a design that could satisfy the requirements. So I say that's unfortunate because it's an existing condition somewhat out of their control, but yet we can't allow something to go forward that would, I agree with Mr. McConnell about the economic development potential of this 60 acres, but you also have to consider the huge volume of economy that exists on that freight and those commuters and those workers traveling up and down U.S. Highway 60. That's also extremely important in this scenario. So I say all that, and so that has to be addressed, and not just for this 60 acres, but for the entire corridor. And so the city has been actively pursuing a path to address that. Right now, MoDOT and Federal Highway have already committed a level of funding to conduct a study of this entire corridor that will give us what we intend to be a plan that will create some conditions that will be more favorable to developments like this, and hopefully provide a greater window of opportunity to address some of these deficiencies. But I say all that just because I didn't want there to be an impression that these were just, there's just a few deficiencies here and you can just go mark them up and everything's good. Some of these will be much more difficult to correct than just, changing a line from here to there or something like that. There's some larger issues at play.
Any other questions, comments, or Ms. Grant?
Sorry, do you know when we rezoned this commercial?
It was 2 or 3 months ago. It was pretty recent that we rezoned the commercial.
Yeah, I think it was early 2018, I believe.
Were those same concerns brought forth then, that the rezoning at commercial was going to be, like, he rezoned it commercial obviously to make it into more than just what it's been, which is the agriculture. But was that ever discussed with the developer at that time, that this was going to be a situation if you want to develop it later?
No, not that, that the transportation would have to be addressed and traffic would have to be studied, yes. That study would reveal the problems that we are now aware of. No, we were not aware of those problems then, and so it was not a part of discussion at P&Z or at council during those rezone hearings.
It was in June.
It was in June.
It should have been June 19th.
Not really that long ago.
Any other questions, comments, or discussion from council?
Mr. Mayor,
Sir?
so in light of that, what Garrett is saying is probably the same thing and why we had the work session about the Highway 60 corridor and why we've had all the discussion and why we push to have Highway 60 addressed. I think the outcome of that study, no one would have foreseen. That's where I would understand the frustration for any of the, not just for this development, but for other developments that we're talking to along there, is open the door to say, listen, right now there is a very difficult opportunity to even get onto Highway 60 right now until that study is done, until an evaluation is done. But I think that this particular development, it was not foreseen at the front end, nor would it typically be done. That's why I think that it has to be evaluated, why I think MoDOT is moving so quickly, because that intersection is at 113% capacity. And so the difficulty with that particular development is slowing that down when it's already at over capacity. And I think that's the challenge that's being addressed, that was brought up after the rezone was taking place. So it's very unfortunate, because it's not just this one, it's every single, there's other people like Tyler's mentioning that are interested in doing development. And we're having to say, hold on, until this can be analyzed, you got some serious financial challenges that may be awaiting you to take care of it. So seeing Federal Highway and seeing the state step up and put this as the #1 priority on that list when it didn't even exist. So if you look at it, that never even existed until this got brought up, and we did push to get that done. So I commend staff, MoDOT, and even Federal. I mean, to see them put Federal Highway dollars behind it after 6, and we're only talking about, what was that, 4 months ago or less, that we've even got it on the list. So it is unfortunate, but I think we're going to have to analyze what that corridor can and how it ought to be used, because I agree with Garrett and I agree with Tyler. It's been a long process, but Highway 60 plays a huge piece of that, and the cost of that.
My concern was the cost to the developer prior. Like, once he did this and once he got it started, then he's incurred, well, I don't know how much, but I assume could potentially be a lot of money into this development to just, do we have a time frame on?
Well, I mean, even if they did a study that took a year, it could be 5 years before they ever do even apply funding to that. But at least you would know what is the actual remedy. Is it adding an additional lane? Is it adding an outer road? That piece to me, that even for the McConnells and the applicants in this situation, you'd be frustrated saying, what is the answer? I think that until that analysis is done, and I think it's probably 10 years, 2009 they were talking about this, but there was never really an analysis done. I think us pushing it to the forefront was the critical piece, but unfortunately their development is caught into that no man's land, if you will, and why there's so many challenges with the transportation. But yeah, this is one of those that's very unfortunate that there be any money spent on the engineering side. But even in that traffic study that was done, it still did not match the zoning that was put forth. So some of that money and some of those traffic studies needed to match exactly what the land use was gonna be, and in that situation, I do not believe it did.
I have a question that may seem ignorant, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. And I don't know that they would even be willing to do this, but I wanna ask it. If there was a reduction in the number of lots to be platted, is there an acceptable area that could be platted and be acceptable with the city? I'm not talking about the other change, the other things that need to be remedied, because some of those would be null and void if you reduced the number of lots that were platted initially. So is there a land area that, and I'm only talking so that, to go off of her point and Mr. Ann's point, if there's been money spent to engineer to come up to try to find a plat, is there a certain area that could be used and platted based on the current traffic study?
So, in theory, yes. Now, whether that actually pans out in terms of, so you define a smaller area and then you study that. The issue is that still has to go to Farm Road 103, and so you've got to look at what that intersection is going to look like. Now, if you restrict the area down, obviously, then you're committing to a smaller trip generation, fewer cars. So I think your odds get better. That's why I say, in theory, maybe that works. Now, I'm not a traffic engineer, and
I'm not asking you to foresee the future.
Sure, and whatever engineer looks at that would have to perform that analysis and then see what the results are. So, yeah, in theory, if you reduce the size and the scope, and so you're putting fewer cars into that intersection, you could potentially you could come up with a design that provides an adequate level of service that MoDOT and the city would find to be acceptable. So, in theory, yes. Now, I hate to put that out there and say in theory yes, and then have the analysis come back and say even a smaller area tips the scale to where you can't make that happen, because that's also a possibility I can't rule out. So it could be worth looking into on a preliminary level just to see, but that's really. It's tough to say for sure, but obviously as you reduce the amount of traffic, your odds get better of having a more acceptable service level there.
Okay. Mr. Dyckman, did you have some?
No.
Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Any other question, Mr. Franklin?
Mr. Tyson, when it comes to number 7, the water main between Lot 3 and the common area needs to be on a loop. Is that a loop within the property area, or is that a loop that they're going to have to travel a distance to connect to?
No, I believe that's contained within the site. The engineer is nodding yes.
Within the site?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions, comments, or concerns? Discussion. Did you have something else, Mr. Franklin?
Honestly, Mr. Mayor, I'm a little bit concerned with just the way this road goes right now. Is there a future plan development to the north of that where this road is to continue? I know one of the discrepancies on it was the fact it didn't have a loop for fire trucks to come through, and so I'm a little bit concerned if this goes through tonight, how can we make sure that all of those discrepancies are followed and addressed before they become an issue? Is there anything else that we can do?
You mean for further development beyond this one?
But right now, it just kind of shows a dead-end road, and so I'm a little concerned. Is that going to be what it always is a dead-end road? We can't really tell what's going to go next door.
So future development would also be required to comply with the same major thoroughfare plan, which would require the continuation of that roadway.
So whoever develops the property next to it is locked into what this...
Correct, yes.
It's important I think back to your original question. Can we require anything in the future of them if you approve it tonight? Absolutely not.
Once it's approved tonight, that's it.
Obviously, the thoroughfare plan would call for an extension of this road that you're talking about. However, that's no guarantee that that's ever going to be developed. And that causes, I believe that's where the deficiency is, and Garrett can correct me if I'm wrong, as far as the turnaround there. So, no, we cannot require anything after today, and no, we can't, obviously predict what's going to happen to this other development, so.
Okay, anything else from council? Seeing none, this is a resolution, so we will, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Say no.
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 Any abstentions?
Abstain.
Motion fails 7-0 with one abstention. Moving on to resolution number 18-R-34, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri to review, amend, and approve the 5-year capital program. I need a motion and a second.
Motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second, Ms. Parks.
The city charter, section 7.6, requires that in conjunction with the annual budget, we prepare a 5-year capital improvement plan. This plan that's submitted before you today is the 2019-2023 5-year capital plan. The process that we embarked on to prepare this plan this year was a little bit different than in previous years. As you know, earlier in the year, we disbanded the CIP committee. So the projects were submitted on a capital improvement project or equipment form, and the items were added into the department's requested budgets. Directors met with the finance staff and the city administration staff to discuss the capital needs as part of the budget process. The needs were then analyzed on a scoring system, and that system is outlined in the CIP document itself. And only the most needed items were actually put into the final budget. The projects that could be funded made it into the constrained 2019 project list. The rest were moved to the 2020 list to be considered for next year's projects. Page 3 contains the complete listing of the constrained and unconstrained projects. The master plans are currently being updated in the city for the water, wastewater, the master comprehensive plan, and the parks master plan. When these documents are finished next year, we will review and incorporate any of the suggestions into our future CIP. The CIP actually serves as our roadmap to the future of our infrastructure. We actually have utilized this CIP document throughout the year if additional funding came available to see what projects we had planned for. It has been used in discussions in our budget preparations. So for the purpose of this document, the capital assets is defined at $5,000 or above. So the amount that's listed as this constrained 2019 project list is slightly lower than the amounts if you total up all the equipment and capital lines in the budget. That's because the budget lines might contain items underneath the 5,000 threshold. So on that note, staff recommends the approval for the 5-year 2019-2023 plan.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns, or discussion from council? I just want to say thank you, whoever all worked on this, because, as the city is putting a tax before the voters, it's important to show that we have a path forward on everything that we're doing, not just, those things that we talked about tonight, but a lot of these things, like you look at the subgrade over there at the driveway at the fire department, and you could keep asphalting over and over, and it's just going to keep causing problems. So let's fix it. So appreciate the leadership and outlook for the future. Anything else from council? Everybody's ready to call it a night, I believe. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Moving on to resolution number 18-R-35, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, creating an ad hoc 2020 Census Complete Count Committee to plan and conduct local educational initiatives and other activities to increase community awareness and participation in the 2020 census. I had a feeling I would talk a lot tonight, so I'm going to pass it off to Ms. Evans.
Good evening. Well, preparation and planning has begun for the 2020 census. And per the United States Census Bureau, a complete count committee must be established at the municipal level. So under the direction of Mayor Essery, a committee has been selected consisting of city employees, council members, and business leaders within the community. The purpose of the committee will be to raise awareness through educational initiatives and to increase involvement in the 2020 census. The Census Bureau also requires that the established committee be ratified by resolution or ordinance, so that's what we're here tonight to do. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
And if you're familiar with the charter, one thing that may seem confusing is normally we would not do a vote for an ad hoc committee because that's not a commission or something that requires council vote. But as they've requested,
yes,
that we do pass a resolution to
that
make it official for the census.
Yes.
Any questions, comments, or concerns from council? Excuse me. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. Sorry. Resolution number 18-36, I'm sorry, -R-36. A resolution of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri, making available the cost information for a possible change in retirement benefits for its employees under the Missouri Local Government Employees Retirement System. Need a motion and a second.
Motion. Second.
Motion and a second, Ms. Addington.
As included, as Ms. Parks talked about earlier, in the 2019 budget that was approved tonight, allowed for the city to absorb the 4% employee contribution. This is actually a planned change in our loggers program to our current pension system. Loggers, our current pension plan, from a contributory status, which when the employees contribute is considered contributory, to a non-contributory status. Since this is an actual change in the plan, it requires an actuary to be completed and that be made publicly available for 45 days. So that's the purpose of this resolution tonight, is to have that actuary be publicly available for 45 days. It'll be in the city clerk's office for viewing. Once that 45-day window has passed, we'll be back at council for a resolution for the actual plan change.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, or concerns from council? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 8-0. We will not be having a financial report. We're going to put it off tonight because of the time we still have to do an executive session. So I'll turn over reports from staff. Mr. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real quickly, what you have in front of you tonight, I'm proud to announce the Citizen Transparency Portal that will be launched basically the 27th. So we have it should look like this. It's just a one sheet of paper that you can log on. And what this is it's a very interesting, one of those portals that the community will be able to access and see where the city spends its money, from everything from salaries and wages. Every single dime that is spent in this city, there will be a portal that our community and our residents, back page right there, that they can look onto. We'll post this onto our website. People can click onto that link. You can see where the money is spent. So hopefully that'll be up and running either tonight or tomorrow. So looking forward to having that for our community to be able to see where their money is spent, and just the new software that was available that provided this function for us. I think this is one of those situations that, again, sets us a little bit more out there to the community that not everyone has. And so I'm looking forward to presenting this information, but that is, for the sake of time, all I have tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
First thing, I have to shame Miss Brenda Jackson for just a minute. She has done a fantastic job for the city for 13 years, and we all knew she was going to retire, and she chose to do that while we were here. So I don't know if it was just because of us or just because she's ready to retire, but so she does have a letter, and I've asked her if I could read it. It's brief, and she said it was okay, so I'm going to see if I can make her cry. Dear Mayor Esri, 13 years ago, the City of Republic hired me to be the city clerk. I accepted this position not knowing how positive an impact it would have on my life. Yes, there have been struggles and difficulties along the way. However, we have adapted and overcome in addressing those difficulties. My goal from the beginning was to create and maintain records management system which met state compliance standards, served the citizens of Republic, Missouri well, and would be easy for my successor to carry forward. I believe I have accomplished that goal. It is now time for me to pass the torch to the next city clerk. Please accept this letter as formal notification of my retirement from the City of Republic as of January 11th, 2019. I'm giving a 6-week notice to ensure a smooth transition and completion of outstanding projects. And then she does leave the caveat, which helps us out, that please let me know if there's anything I can do to assist in this matter. So we will certainly be sure.
Be careful what you ask for.
Brenda, I think everything that you listed in there, you've done and more. You've been a great, reliable, not just an employee, but someone we can count on to take care of things for us whenever it's needed. And I'm not going to go too in-depth because this isn't your last day yet, but we've already decided that there will be a veto of that, and it would require a 2/3 council vote, and we'll do that on a Thursday, so no one's here. So thank you, Brenda, for 13 years, and we look forward to you enjoying retirement. Well, we'll probably still call you. I have two real quick things. We talked about our relationship with the governor's office and how we have a great ally there, and that's resulted in, I have the opportunity to host a meeting with the governor December 4th, and it's for all Greene County mayors, and I'm just ecstatic that they chose Republic, Missouri to do it. And the topic is economic development and workforce development. And I think that's really that's a big thing, you know, that not only that we have a governor that's willing to look at the municipalities in the way that he does, but that we're holding it here. So that is a great thing. The other thing is, I haven't gotten to talk to Scott about this, so he may look at me. Well, we've talked a little bit about it, but there is a new drug that is being sold legally throughout the state of Missouri and other states in the country called Kratom. It's Kratom. And I'll let you do your own research on it, but it comes from leaves of an evergreen tree indigenous to Southeast Asia. It's sold at gas stations throughout the state of Missouri, including here. And there have been 44 deaths in the United States linked to this drug. It has opiate-like effects, and now we've spoken to a NICU nurse who has started to see babies addicted to kratom when they're born. And they're having to put these babies on a cycle of morphine to wean them off of this drug that is completely illegal in the state of Missouri. I'm not a huge fan of legislation. As you guys know, we have signed very few laws into place since I've been here, since any of us have been here, quite honestly. But this is important because a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 12-year-old could go into the gas station and buy this right now. And that's not acceptable to me. We did have a meeting with the Speaker of the House, Elijah Har, and our state rep, Jeff Messenger. They fully intend on proposing some legislation at the state level, but we know the pace that runs at as well. And we could be talking 2 or 3 years before it makes it to the governor's desk, let alone be signed based on who might be the governor at that time. So I think we talk about regional, and I think it's probably our leadership. We advised the state; they were not even aware of it. So I think we're going to try to come up with some legislation that identifies how we can control this or keep it from being sold, at least to a small child that walks in and wants to get a hold of it. So I'm going to get off of my soapbox now. And where did we start last week?
I believe you started with me.
Okay. We won't do that. We'll start over here, Mr. Franklin.
Keep it short and sweet. Thank you, everybody, all the hard work on putting everything together to us tonight for council. Appreciate all the citizens that came in to speak to us as well. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Duran.
Thank you so much for the workshop. All of that information was amazing. So for everybody who put that packet together, wow, it looks great. Thank you for all the citizens that came out. Your voices have been heard. So that's pretty much it.
What's the standard? Is it after 2 I get to start saying echo?
Yeah.
Echo it. No, seriously, thank you. Thank you for all the hard work that you guys do. I appreciate it.
Mr. Dyken.
Well, of course, again, with the reporting that we've gotten from our finance department and so on, and being, last year I was chair of the CIP committee and know how much time it took hearing all this stuff and compiling a list. I take my hat off to them because we didn't have to do it this year because we went a different route on it, and I think we've got, here again, the best staff you could ask for.
Right. Mr. Self.
Congratulations to Brenda, and I wish you the best on your retirement. I want to apologize earlier when we were talking about the tax. I had a little bit of brain lapse. It's been a long day, lost my train of thought, but really just want to kind of go back and say, about the tax. I think the educational piece is probably the most important part of it, because in that it seems like almost every department has a need, and with that tax, it feels like that is getting fulfilled. When I talk to people, it's why does the Republic have this, or why doesn't the Republic have that? And this is one of those deals that we can help facilitate to bring more things into Republic and up our services. And then the last thing I'll say is, in certain situations, in certain cities, it's restricted strictly to that community of putting a burden on them of paying for the services. Whereas in this case, we're not collecting strictly from our citizens, but also people coming through that are using our services as well. So whether it be Billings or Clever or any other town that would come through Republic, it would assist us in our overall goals. So
thank you, sir.
That's what I wanted to finish.
Now you got it out.
I got it out.
Mr. Wilson.
Well, I don't have much tonight. It was a very interesting meeting, especially the discussion on Elm and Lynn. As I understand it from the conversations, anybody that would want to put in a real estate office anywhere in the town of Republic could apply to do such a thing. So it was an interesting meeting.
Sir. Mr. Jones?
It's been an active couple of weeks for citizen contact of mine, and it's been good. It's been informative to me, but one in particular that seems relatively small and innocuous was just a call about a pothole, and one that I forwarded to Mr. Cameron and Andrew, and it's always great to send that request from a citizen to a department head and get an email back from the citizen 3 days later that says, thank you so much for taking care of that. I mean, any organization can die the death of 1,000 cuts because they ignore the cut. And so anytime that a cut or a pothole in this instance is taken care of, it just, it shows the positive, the dynamic that's taking place within the organization, and that's a good thing. So thank you to both those gentlemen for that. Brenda, I think the goal of anyone who works and cares about the work they do, and that's obvious through what you do, is to leave the position in better shape than when you came into it. And I can't think of any better example of that than what you have. So thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Shears.
Yeah, I've probably spoken enough tonight, but
along the
same lines as Mr. Jones, though, as councilmen and councilwomen, we've got to realize that sometimes, we're the voice of people in our ward, and maybe people not in our ward, maybe the only voice, the only way they can get their feelings and thoughts through on any item, would be a pothole or rezoning or whatever. And sometimes it can be difficult when maybe your personal feelings may be different than what theirs is. But again, we're just one person in that ward, and they're one person in that ward. We've got to keep that in consideration, that we are representatives.
Right. Thank you. And by the way, I'm very happy with our new dress code. We've all agreed to wear suits every meeting from here on out.
I know. I'm like, hold on a second.
So, with nothing else, I'll ask to go into executive session. No further action other than announcing adjournment by the mayor shall take place after an executive session that is scheduled as the last matter on the agenda, unless otherwise stated on the agenda or as allowed per RSMO 610.02. And tonight we'll be covering RSMO 610.021.3, hiring, firing, promotion, or disciplining personnel, closed session, closed vote, closed record. Do I have a motion and a second to go into executive session?
Motion.
Second.
Roll call vote.
Come on, retiree.
Councilmember Self?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Councilmember Shears?
Aye.
Councilmember Dykeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Russell?
Aye.
Councilmember Duran?
Aye.
Councilmember Franklin?
Aye. Motion carries 8-0. We will take a 5-minute recess and return for executive session.
As people are sprinting to the door.
I know, running with 3 drinks. She was really thirsty.
8:30, huh?